the ones at the very, very top, whether it's, whether it's a Bill Gates, whether it's a Lady Gaga or whatever, there is one thing, and you can't buy it. You can't, you can only articulate it with two words, and you don't know where to get it, and you don't know why some people have it and some people don't.
Welcome to the Quest for Questions podcast. I've got a dynamite of an interview for you guys. You will hear from someone who has worked in the music industry for 38 years, is a master storyteller, and despite his 60 years of age, is still the most curious person in the room no matter where he goes. To my surprise, his father was from Poland, of all places, which made for a great pre-show talk. You will hear stories like how Steve went from pursuing an acting career through becoming a rock star to finally helping stars like Ed Sheeran, Metallica, and Billy Idol help their vision, help their stories, help their narratives. You also hear how he landed a job at Warner Media, made a positive nuisance of himself, and became a virus that spread all over the company. And finally, the moment he realized he's a big fish, when walking down the street, minding his own business, he got recognized by Ace Frehley from the famous band Kiss. If you stick long enough, you will even learn how to craft your own story that will make people fall in love with your art no matter what you do. Here's Conrad, yerba mate addict, and here's an interview with one and only Steve Waxman. Enjoy. What I'm curious to know, like the first thing, and I haven't seen it anywhere on your pages, nowhere in your bio, is how, let's go back, like, time machine 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You are very young, and you are about to go somehow into the whole like client management and the music industry as a whole. So what my question there is, like, how did it happen for you? How did you go first thing into music industry? Like, what was the spark? Were you always kind of, interested in music, and then how, like, it's such a specific path to go into, like, working with artists. Usually people want to be an artist, not like maybe manage for them. So I think it would be great to hear kind of your story, like your story, and how did it happen that this was something that you pursued and something you got started with, and then you stuck with it for like 40, 50 years now. So,
well, it's not okay. It's not 50 years. It's 38 years to this point. But I can go back 50 years. I can certainly go back to 50 years when I was a young kid.
How old are you?
I'm 60.
60?
Yeah.
Wow.
Do I look older than that?
No, you look definitely younger. I mean, like, you also are, like, you feel younger.
Okay. Anyway, so when I've always, as a kid, been interested in music. I don't remember when I started playing instruments, but I remember that when I was turning 10, I asked my mom's best friend asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I said a guitar. I didn't know how to play guitar. I just said I wanted a guitar. I think before that, maybe when I was 8, my mom decided that I should have piano lessons. So the same friend, her daughter played piano, and so she would give me piano lessons, but we didn't have a piano in the house. So what she did was she had a piece of paper, and she drew piano keys on the piece of paper, and I would go to their house, I would take a lesson, and then after I take the lesson, she would make sure that I knew on this piece of paper where all the notes were, so that when I went home, I could practice the fingering on the piano on this piece of paper. That probably went on for about 6 months, and then my parents bought an inexpensive upright piano and put it into my sister's bedroom in our apartment, and so that I could practice. And of course, since it was there, I never practiced. I kind of turned my back on the piano altogether once we had one.
Yeah, that's it. Usually happens.
Just when you're a kid. That being said, I think that from those early piano lessons, like I back then, I would listen to a lot of classical music, but I would also listen to the Monkees, Jan and Dean that were this folk duo back then in the 60s. My brother and sister are both older than me. I'm going to tell you that I think that my very first musical memory is probably seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, but not really understanding what that impact was, because all I remember from it really is my brother and sister going crazy when it was happening.
Okay.
Anyway, so I think that I was always interested in music. I was always interested in the way different instruments could make sounds. My mom tells me that I would bang on pots and pans a lot too. So that part I don't remember. Anyway, I asked for a guitar when I was 10. She got me the guitar, and I never played it. I mean, I would strum it every once in a while, but I didn't really play it. I was telling a story the other day, though. My brother did play guitar. I was telling a story the other day on a Facebook forum about the time my brother rented an electric guitar and an amp. And it was in the living room. I remember this so clearly. It was in the living room. The guitar was leaned up against the amp. I had never heard of an electric guitar in person before. I didn't know, on records, I didn't know I was listening to electric guitars. And my brother was at school, so I turned on the amp. And because it was leaning up against because the guitar was leaning up against the amp, it started feeding back, and it completely freaked me out. And I ended up, I didn't know how, I was so freaked out by that sound that was coming out that I couldn't remember how I turned the amp on. So I ended up just pulling the plug on the amp to get it to stop making that noise. Anyway, I just ended up with this curiosity about how to make sounds with things. And I would go, if I saw a musical instrument in a store, I would go up to it and I'd start trying to figure out how to make sounds with it. And I would do that a lot. And things started to click in my head that, especially with stringed instruments, that you could put your finger down and you could start making sounds that made sense. So when I was 16, I was in the living room of our apartment, and I was listening to my favorite album of the early 70s, mid 70s was Cat Stevens' Tea for the Tillerman. And I was listening to the record, and my brother had the songbook for the album. And I happened to open it up as I was listening to the record, and it has the chords there. And when I saw the chords over top of the words, and I saw the shape of the chords, it all started to make sense to me. So I went into the den where my brother was making out with his girlfriend, and I borrowed his acoustic guitar, and I brought it out into the living room, and I started, trying to make the chords that I was seeing in the book. And of course, I don't know if you play guitar at all, but I mean, anybody that plays guitar knows. Yeah. Well, then at the beginning, your fingers trying to make those chords hurt a lot.
Yeah.
And I think the difference between people that keep it up and the people that quit are the people that keep it up, work through that pain.
Yeah.
and then get to the other side. And then the next pain is figuring out all the other chords. Anyway, within a week, I could play a lot of the songs on that record. And I started playing Simon and Garfunkel songs because my brother also had the Sounds of Silence songbook. And I started having the same dream as everybody else. It's like, ooh, I could play music for a living. This would be really great. I could be in a band. It'd be awesome. So I think I'd been playing maybe for 3 weeks or a month, and a couple of friends of mine had a band, and I asked them if I could come play with them. And they said yes. So I actually went out and I bought an inexpensive electric guitar and took it over to their house. And I don't remember exactly what we played, because I could only play open chords at that point. But at some point during this jam session, they wanted to play Pinball Wizard. And I didn't know how to play it. So I was watching the guy, and the guy was playing bar chord. He was playing the A bar chord. And I'm like, what's that? And he goes, well, that's whatever note. It was like an E that he was playing it, up the neck. And so I then tried to figure out how to play that thing. And it was hilarious, because I remember I had, to hold down that first finger, and then how did I get that finger over there and have that finger hold down? Where's it exactly it's supposed to? So anyway, that's, I started learning how to play rock and roll music, that with playing with other people. And I definitely wanted to be in a band. Kiss Alive became a really big record for me. I wanted to become a rock star. I started growing my hair. I would answer ads in the papers for bands and go and audition for bands. I would, didn't have any money to buy guitars, but I would again answer ads and go look at people's guitars.
Were you good at this point? Like actually?
Oh, I could play. I got to the point where I could play enough chords to get by, but I had good rhythm. And because of everything else, learning piano early on and being a music lover early on, I had a decent sense of rhythm. And I understood some of the concepts with regards to changing chords on the beat or just off the beat or whatever. So I understood some concepts. It's just a matter of dexterity and becoming, more able to move from one chord to another, being able to listen to records and find the chords. I mean, when I really got into it, I had a turntable that I could put the record on, put headphones on, and plug my guitar into the turntable. And so I could hear the guitar too. So I would be up half the night trying to learn songs off of records,
But you were just playing, or you were also singing, and that was your dream to sing and play, or just play?
I'm going to tell you something. I could bring my wife upstairs right now and she could tell you I did not sing. I have just the worst voice. When I sing in the car, I turn into Ethel Merman because that's the only way that I can get sounds like I talk like this when I'm singing a song because Broadway's my kind of town. That's the way I sing in the car. I would sing Queen that way. I would sing Kiss that way. I would sing Lynyrd Skynyrd that way. I would sing Aerosmith that way. Dream on, dream on. Things like that. Oh, no. Anyway, I wanted to be a guitar player, and early on, because really early on, I was like, I want to be a rhythm guitar player. I want to be like Paul Stanley and Kiss. I don't want to have to develop to the point where I play lead guitar because that's a whole new set of things that I'm going to have to learn. And I'm like, I don't know that I have the patience to learn all that. Anyway, but so all that being said, my initial dream in my life, hang on one second here. You don't have to pause. Spirit, lay down. Okay? Lay down. I'm on it. I'm doing an interview right now. I can't help you out right now. Okay? So if you want to just lay down, that'd be great. Okay.
The dog?
Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful. Oh, here he comes. Oh, hang on. I'm going to show you my dog. Come around this side, Spirit. Come here. World.
Is it the beauty? Oh, is it the border collie? Oh, yeah. That's the race I want. Nice.
Yeah. Say hi to Conrad. Say hello.
Oh, damn.
There you go.
That's great.
Okay. Anyway. Okay, now lay down. Okay, I'm on with Conrad. It's going to be a bit.
These are smart dogs, no?
Yes. Well, yeah, he manipulates the hell out of me. So I have to say that it turned into wanting to be a rock star, but really from the time I was a kid, I always wanted to be an actor.
Actor?
Yeah. No, that was definitely my thing from. I can't even tell you what age. I just was obsessed with becoming an actor from the time I'm going to say 6 or 7 years old.
So while you are pursuing the kind of guitar thing, you are still in the background, just like.
No. To me, I was pursuing being an actor, and in the background it was guitar.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I got involved in whatever kind of theatrical program I could get involved with after school. I would get involved in all the school programs that had anything to do with theater. And so I eventually, I don't know that you pursue a rock and roll dream. I mean, some people get right into it, and I love the idea, but I think the rock and roll thing was because I wanted to be famous. I don't
Okay.
know. I don't know. I don't know if I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be famous. Anyway, I when I graduated from high school, my father said to me, "So what are you going to do now?" And I said, "I'm going to go to Hollywood. I'm going to make movies. I'm going to be famous." And he's like, "Oh, why? Like, do you act?" Because so for seriously, I never talked about it at home. I did all this stuff and never talked about it at home.
Hmm.
And so my parents had never seen me act. They had sent me to programs and stuff, but that was to get me out of their hair,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I did summer, these great summer programs where I was doing, theater and all a bunch of other creative things. But my parents never asked me questions about it because, again, as we talked about before, before this interview started, it's like, my dad's from Poland, my mom's from Russia. They don't really,
Yeah.
they're from the old country. They didn't really understand the kinds of things that we would do in North America. So anyway, so he said, "Oh, you act," and I'm like, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "Are you good?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I'm pretty good." He goes, "Could you use more schooling?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I suppose so." And he goes, "I'll tell you what. Find yourself a school, and I'll send you to a school." And I'm like, "All right." I'm thinking to myself, Conrad, you asked the question. Here's the story. Um,
No, that's perfect.
so what I did was I looked around at all of the acting schools, the major acting schools around the world, the Royal Academy um, in London, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in the States, Juilliard, and on and on and on, Strasberg, all these things. And I started auditioning for them all. And one of the places that I looked into, I don't know, I think it was Strasberg or Stella Adler. It was Stella Adler, which was a big acting school in New York. I saw that they had a program through NYU, New York University. And I thought, I kind of like the idea of going to university. Nobody in my family had gone to university. My brother had gone for like one semester and then dropped out to become a musician. That didn't really pan out for him. And I'm like, I like the idea of going to university, so I'll apply at NYU as well. And I applied, and I auditioned at NYU. I auditioned at the Royal Academy. Luckily, like these places would send their teams to big cities, and Toronto being a big city, I could audition in Toronto for most of these places. But NYU, I had to go to New York and audition.
Mm.
And it was my first time in New York City. And I was blown away by New York.
Yeah.
Anyway, I ended up getting accepted everywhere, which was fantastic, and a bit of a surprise to me, quite frankly, because I think I always felt like I was more of a class clown than a classical actor. but when I got accepted to NYU, got my acceptance letter from NYU, it was like, I don't want to go anywhere else. This is where I want to go. And so my dad, when I got the acceptance, along with the acceptance was the application, plus it said how much it cost, and it was really expensive. And I'm like, oh, there's no way he's going to let me go. There's no way he's going to send me there. So I talked to my parents about it. They didn't say anything. So I figured it was just not happening. And I had graduated in January from high school, and I was working in my dad's factory, doing shipping and receiving. And one day we're driving home, and he said to me, "So are you going to go to that school?" I said, "Which school are you talking about?" He goes, "The one in New York." And he's like, and I said, "NYU?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I went, "Well, it's expensive." He goes, "Do you want to go there?" And I went, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Well, what do you need to do?" And I said, I need to send them a deposit. And he goes, "Okay, well, when we get home, let's write a check and do." And that's what happened. I ended up going to NYU and studying. I ended up studying drama at NYU. And at the end of my first year, I met well, okay. At the end of I took my guitars with me. This is when things start to cascade here. I took my guitar with me and I would play in the dorm a lot, in the dorm that I was living in. And then I would play where the dorm was if you know, or if the people that are listening know, Washington Square Park down in Greenwich Village, I would play in Washington Square Park. One day, I was back in the dorm, and these two guys came up to me, and they said, "Excuse me, are you the guy that was playing guitar in Washington Square Park yesterday?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I didn't know who these guys were, but they were around my age. I said, "Yeah." So listen, we've got a band, and we're looking for a rhythm guitar player. Do you want to come and audition? And I said, "Well, sure." And we set up a date, for later on in the week for me to come to their rehearsal space to audition for their band. So I show up at the rehearsal, 15, 20 minutes early, and there's somebody else on stage auditioning with them. Mm. And so they just tell me to sit down and wait. So I'm at the back of the room and I'm listening to the band play, and it was a pretty good band, and they're playing the song, and I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm just listening to the song. I was like, okay, whatever. And the guy finishes his audition and he leaves. I start to take my guitar out of the case, and one of the guys, the singer or the guitar player, said, "Can you wait a couple of minutes? Let us warm up with a couple of other songs." This guy showed up just as we all got here, so we haven't really had a chance to warm up yet. And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And they started playing this song that was phenomenal. And it was like I got really, really excited. I'm like, holy crap, this is really, really great. So I took my guitar out and I was watching the guitar player play, and I was trying to copy down all the chords that he was playing, and like, this is really, really great. And then they played a second song. I was like, oh my gosh, this band is fantastic. I can't believe this.
Well,
this
is amazing. Songs.
Yeah, their own songs. So when the time came for me to get up on stage and to plug in my amp, they went to teach me the song that the other guy had played with them. And I said to them, with all due respect, that song was a little bit boring to me. But that first song that you guys just played, can we play that one? And they kind of like looked at each other and said, sure. And the guitar player came over and said, "You want me to show you the chords?" And I went, "No, I think I got it." I think, I was watching you. And we went into it and we played it, and it sounded amazing. I mean, I flubbed a bunch of chords, obviously, but for the most part, it sounded really amazing. And everybody was like smiling, had big, started laughing because it just really clicked. They taught me the second song that they had played, and we played that. It was great. We went back, we played the boring first song again, and and it was all right. And then they said, "What kind of stuff are you into?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm into Aerosmith and Queen and Ted Nugent and Judas Priest and Kiss." And they went, "Kiss?" And the singer took off his sweatshirt and had an Ace Frehley t-shirt on underneath, and we started playing Kiss songs. So it was at that point they said, "You want to do, you want to be in the band?" And I'm like, "Sure." And at that point they said to me, "We have a record deal." I'm like, "What?" Because yeah, we're signed to this label called Carrere Records, which is a French label that's distributed by Atlantic Records. And we're going to be doing a demo in a few weeks, and we just needed to finish, rounding out the band. I'm like, holy crap, that's amazing. So I ended up, I wasn't planning on staying in New York that summer, but now I'm in this band. So I decided that, I called my parents up and said, "I'm now in this band. Can I stay in New York over the summer? And I'll take a bunch of classes at NYU during the summer." And they said, "Sure. Okay. Yeah, whatever. What does this mean?" I said, "Well, it means that I'll probably finish school a little bit early, but, it'll be great." So I go and I register for classes for the summer, and I meet this woman during that registration day who ends up becoming a girlfriend. And she's in the film department at NYU, and she's going into her third year, and she needs a film script to get into her third year of film school, but she can't write. I ended up writing a short film for her. She got into the class she wanted to get into, and I realized I can write. So what I ended up doing was then taking a second course, a second path at NYU. So I was now double majoring in drama and dramatic writing. And that's how I ended up going through school, doing, part of my week was taking my acting classes. Part of my week was taking writing courses. So it was a blast.
And then playing the band, yeah?
And playing, well, okay, so the band lasted the entire of the rest of the summer. What happened was we all moved in together in this loft, and we got into a big fight, and the bass player threw a cigarette at the singer, and the cigarette went into a couch. The couch caught on fire. I said, "This is fucking crazy. I can't be with you guys." And I quit the band. The drummer quit the band. The drummer and I hooked up with another couple of guys from a different band and formed another band called Brighton that spent the summer rehearsing, and that went nowhere. And I continued with school. A year later, my college roommate, a guy named Tim Summer, had a punk rock show on the local New York University radio station, WNYU. And his friend was a guy named Jack Rabid, who was a drummer in a punk band called Even Worse. And Even Worse had mostly broken up, but it was Jack's band. So Jack was putting the band back together and asked Tim if Tim wanted to play in the band. They had been out for a walk in St. Mark's Place. A guy was selling a bass. Jack said, "If you buy that bass, you can be in Even Worse." So Tim bought the bass, but didn't know how to play any instrument. Brought the bass back to the dorm room. I taught him how to play Even Worse songs. So then Jack and Tim said, "Well, why don't you be in the band since you already know the songs?" We ended up having a singer, was another kid from the dorm, this guy named Kenny Temkin, who we called Kenny Tantrum. And we showed up to the first rehearsal, and Jack had brought another guitar player so that there were going to be two guitar players. The other guitar player was Thurston Moore, who's now with Sonic Youth. And I don't know do you know anything about Thurston Moore? Do you know anything about Sonic Youth?
No.
Okay, so Sonic Youth is a band. I would call them a noise band. They're a band that made records that were built on sound rather than music. So
Interesting.
He sings melodies, but it's almost like a roar. Their sound is a roar. So that first rehearsal, we would all play. Remember we played, the first song we played was Motorhead's Ace of Spades. And when the song was over, Thurston's guitar was out of tune, and I had to help him tune up his guitar. And then we played an even worse song called Last Night's Blimpie. And when the song was over, Thurston's guitar was out of tune, and I had to tune his guitar. And this happened over and over again for the 2 hours that we all played together. And I didn't understand. I mean, it was a crappy guitar, but I didn't understand why his guitar would keep going out of tune. A couple weeks after that rehearsal, Thurston and Sonic Youth, and Thurston's wife, Kim Gordon, was the bass player in Sonic Youth. So they invited us to come see them play at this club in New York called the Mud Club. And we went there, and they come out on stage, and for the first song, Thurston takes a screwdriver, jams it into the strings, and takes a drumstick, and he's hitting the strings here with the drumstick, and he's moving the screwdriver up and down, and that's how they're playing this song. At the end of the set, we go down to the dressing room, and Thurston says, "So what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I think I know why you can't keep your guitar in tune." Anyway, Even Worse played a bunch of shows in New York City, a couple of shows in New Jersey. We made one single, and I think, so we played those. I'm trying to remember the Beastie. So we played one show in New York City at this place called Irving Plaza. We were the second of maybe 5 bands to play on stage. The Beastie Boys were actually the first band to play on stage, back when they were a punk band. The headlining band, the main support band, because I think it was a Bad Brains show. The main support band was this band called Kraut. One of the guitar players in Kraut was also their producer, and it was Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols. About a week later, our single was ready to go out. And we were playing this gig, and Jack needed the money from the gig to pay for the singles. I needed the money from the gig to buy food. And so I said, I needed the money. Jack said, well, we need it for the singles. I'm like, I can't eat if I don't have the money. And Jack said, if you take the money, you can't be in the band. And I said, give me the money. So anyway, to that point, that ends my life as wanting to be a rock star. I'd been in a bunch of bands. Now in a punk band. I had made a single. I had made it down. I was like, the dream hadn't died, but that is the end for the most part of that portion of the dream. I didn't know that was the end of it, but that was the end of it. When I graduated from NYU, I needed to make some decisions as to what I was going to do with my life. And the week after I graduated, I went to LA just to see what LA was like. I came back and I made a plan for myself. And my plan was to take my college degree in writing and go into advertising, that I would become a copywriter. This is great. I would become a copywriter in advertising. I would parlay that into being a television writer. When I had all the success that I wanted as a television writer, I would write films. And by the time I was 35, all this would have happened. I would have had a lot of success, and I could now go back into acting. That was my plan. And this is how I put my plan into place. I typed up a resume, 8x10 piece of white paper, had my name, address, phone number, and NYU diploma or NYU graduate, Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Fine Arts, dramatic writing. Interests, guitar, music, water skiing. I don't remember what it said for interest. That was my entire resume. I then went to Madison Avenue in New York, and I went to advertising agencies, and I went to the front desk, and I would hand in this piece of paper to all these different advertising agencies, hoping to get work as a copywriter. It happened that a friend of mine was a receptionist at this management company called Aucoin Management. Bill Aucoin was the guy that managed Kiss in the 70s and now is managing Billy Idol. I went to visit her while I was dropping off these resumes, and it was really quiet in the office. I said, what's going on? And she goes, well, recession hit the music industry last week pretty bad. And we had 30 people here. We're now down to 7. And we can't get anything done because our office boy, we had an office boy that could run errands across town and, deliver packages and pick things up. And so we don't have that. And so we don't really know what we're going to do. We're going to have to spend all this money on couriers and whatnot. And I said, really? Well, hell, I'd do that for free if I could use your offices to do some writing and a place for people to contact me. And she's like, really? Well, hang on a second. She called out the office manager, this woman named Stephanie Tudor. And I went into Stephanie's office and we had a similar conversation. And she's, this is probably like a Thursday or so. And she said, well, if you want to come do that, then when can you start? And I said, how about Monday? And she goes, well, we start at 10 o'clock on Monday. So why don't you come in Monday at 10 o'clock? I came in, I didn't know anything about that side of the music industry, but I came in and I got to tell you, honest to God, by noon, I had seen enough. And it's like, this is what I want to do. This is really, really cool. I mean, you get to work with artists, you get to see, get the inside scoop on records being made. You get to be a part of putting a tour together. It's like, I mean, it just, I think I was, again, asking the right questions of people, and just paying attention to what was going on with the few people that were actually in the office. So Bill Aucoin at that point, sometime that day, or certainly sometime that week, when he saw that I was really interested in what was going on, he sat me down in his office and he said, "Let me explain a few things to you about the music industry." And the very first thing that he said to me, and it's the thing that has sort of been my lodestar, as it were, for my entire career, is he said to me, "You need to understand something. The artist, those of us who are not the artist, we are the facilitators for the artist vision. We need to work with artists that have a clear vision of who they are. And then the rest of us, whether it's us in the management or in the labels or whatever, the rest of us are here to facilitate for that artist's vision, to help them achieve the goals that they want to achieve. So that lets them just stick to the creative stuff, and we can do all the business stuff." And I'm like, all right, that's good with me. And it's now, like I said, 38 years later. And that first lesson that I got is one that has, stayed true to this day, where when I work with artists, the first thing that I try to, get them to articulate is what their vision is, or what I've come to call their narrative. And the reason, and I'll tell you, the reason I call it a narrative at this point is because people got into this habit about, 8, 9, 10 years ago, of talking about, I think when social media started to really explode, started to talk about, building your personal brand, and you kept using this personal brand. It's brand. And I'm like, Kleenex is a brand. Heinz ketchup is a brand. You gotta be, the Rolling Stones can be a brand. The Beatles can be a brand. U2 can be a brand, but you got to get to be really, really, you need to be everywhere to call yourself a brand. But you're a human being, and human beings have stories. And this idea of a vision, it's built out of having your personal story and telling your personal story. And that's how I started referring to it more as a narrative rather than a brand. So I worked for Aucoin for 2.5 years through the process of Billy Idol writing and recording the Rebel Yell album. So I got to see that whole process happen. I got to see the whole process of strategizing a release for an artist. I got to see the whole process of an artist putting a live show on stage. And because I'm Canadian, I needed to get work visa. I got a work visa to stay in the States. And as soon as I got the work visa, I decided to move back to Toronto and move back to Canada and see what I could do with myself there, because to stay working in America meant I was going to be an office boy for, in this small management company for who knows how long. And once things didn't work out there, what was I going to do? So I decided I would come back to Canada and I would start again. And, I used the connections that I had in New York to meet some people in Toronto that were in the music business. And I ended up, in a roundabout way, getting a job at an independent label in Toronto called Ready Records. And they were looking for somebody to do radio promotion and publicity. Two things that I only knew sort of peripherally from being in management. So I talked my way into the job. They offered me the job on a Thursday evening, they offered me a job. I accepted, and I was going to start on the Monday. Everything happens on a Thursday, and then everything starts on a Monday. Strange. So then maybe clearly some of this is either the truth or my version of the truth. So
that's story.
So yeah. So what I ended up doing was I got on a plane back to New York on the Friday morning, because back then there was an airline called People's Airline, and you could fly from Toronto to New York. Or no, sorry, from Buffalo to New York. And Buffalo is 2 hours from Toronto. So you take a bus to Buffalo and then get on the plane. It was $39 to go from Buffalo to New York and New York to Buffalo. So I flew back to New York. I went into Billy Idol's label. I sat with the radio promotion guy in the morning and listened to him talk to radio stations in the morning. Went for lunch, spent the afternoon in the office of the woman that did publicity and listened to how she did publicity. And then I came back to Toronto, and on Monday morning, I started my job at this label doing radio promotion and publicity. And what was really, really funny was when I told my sister that I'd gotten this job, she said, well, what does the job entail? And I told her about, calling people and asking them to play records or talk to artists and whatnot. And my sister, I was always a bit of a wallflower. I was always really, really shy, despite the fact that my ambitions were always to be famous. My ambition was always to be seen. I was really, really shy. And she said to me, so let me get this straight. You're going to call people that you don't know and ask them to do things for you? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, how are you going to do that? I'm like, I don't know, but I got to figure it out, and I will figure it out. And I did. So I worked at Ready Records for about 10 months till they had to close shop because they went bankrupt, despite the fact that the very first record that I ever worked for them was a single called Tell No Lies by a band called The Spoons, or this Canadian band called The Spoons, and it turned into a top 10 single. So it was successful, but the label had been bleeding money for however long it had been bleeding money, and so they ended up going out of business. I then spent the summer, the following summer, going out on tour with Honeymoon Suite, doing selling merch on the road with Honeymoon Suite. And then in December of that year, I got a phone call from a friend of mine that was doing publicity and radio promotion at Canada's largest independent label, a label called Attic Records. And he called me up to say, I'm about to walk into the president's office and hand in my resignation. So give me half an hour and then call him. And so I did. And I said, I understand Ralph has just handed in his resignation. I'd like to come in and talk to you about the job. The guy already knew who I was. So he said, yeah, come on in. I went in, we had a conversation, and he basically wrote a salary on a piece of paper and, slid it over to me on the table. And it was like $250 a week. Are you kidding me? Just to work in the, absolutely. And so, I don't know what day of the week that was, but
probably Thursday.
Probably a Thursday. So I started pretty, probably 2 weeks later, once, Ralph had sort of finished what he was doing at the label. And I spent 6.5 years, I think, at Attic Records. Had a ton of success. There was a heavy metal artist in Canada at the time who's still around these days, a woman named Lee Aaron. We had some really big success with her. There was a sort of a pop rock band called Haywire that we had a ton of success with. I don't know if you would remember, you're way too young for this, but there's a woman named Jennifer Warnes had a record of Leonard Cohen covers called Famous Blue Raincoat. And we were the first country in the world to put it out outside of the US. And we sold 250,000 copies of that. And then in the spring of 1992, I got a phone call from Warner Records here in Canada asking me if I wanted to come in and talk to them about the position of head of publicity at Warner. And I said, sure. And I came in, and I had already known these guys. I'd known the Warner guys for years because now I've been in the music business long enough. I know everybody. And I sat there in the boardroom with the guy that was doing the hiring, and I'm like, what could you possibly ask that you don't already know the answer to with me? And he said to me, look, we're a huge company now. We make a lot of money, but we've become a bit of a dinosaur, and we need to have a virus in the belly of the dinosaur. And we'd like you to be the virus. Or no, and I'm like, well, geez, I'm good with that. I'm absolutely good with that. So, within a week or two, they had made me an offer. which quite frankly was pretty much the same I was making at Attic Records, but this was a much bigger company and there, more opportunities and bigger artists to work with. So I took the job and I made a nuisance of myself pretty quickly. I think that probably for the first 22 years that I was at Warner, I probably came into the office every day thinking they were going to fire me because
Really?
of the kinds of just what I because I was always a squeaky wheel. I always questioned things. I always tried to do things that were way outside the box of what people normally do. I would always stick my nose into other people's business with regards to
Mm,
whether it was marketing or promotion or A&R, and not to be a horrible person about it, not to be an asshole, but to see how far we could push things. I was always curious to see, it's like, how can we make things better? And just like, can I come up with a stupid idea that maybe will lead to a better idea? What I would say to my staff over the years was always, do yourselves a favor and have ideas and come into meetings unencumbered by the responsibility of having to carry those ideas out.
mm,
Because once you start thinking about, well, how do I pull this off? You start editing yourself. Like throw everything out on the table first, and then deal with, once everybody agrees on what a great idea is, then try and figure out how to pull it off. And
yeah.
maybe it's something for you to do, maybe it's something for somebody else to do. But if you don't throw it out there, it never sees the light of day.
Mm, and
And
what?
that's
Yeah, go ahead.
and that's what I would do for you know
And where did that come from in you? Like where?
I think it came from, again, it starts with the management company, because when you start your career in management, you see all the elements and how all the elements work together. You don't just deal with one path. I mean, when you get a job as a publicist, if that's your first job, that's what you know. If you get a job doing radio promotion, that's what you know. If you get a job in marketing, you know how to strategize buying advertising. You might know how to put together a good ad, but you don't necessarily know how to strategize a good publicity plan or a good promotion plan. You may have never been in a studio and seen the way a record is being put together, or been in a rehearsal space with an artist that is writing songs and see how songs can see how songs can change. I saw all of that. So I
Mm,
came into this company having seen all these different things. Pretty much the only thing that I hadn't done was be in the room where negotiations were happening with regards to contracts,
mm-hmm. So you had a lot
and
of
being
perspective,
exactly.
like
And
you.
I so
Mm-hmm.
and so I brought all that to the table.
Mm. But it seems like for me, like it's hard to summarize your story up to this point because it's quite, like there's a lot of paths and things that
Yeah.
happen. But for me, that one thing that all those all those like stories and experiences have in common is that it seems like you never were afraid to pivot. Like you were doing one thing, but you were like not afraid to go into something new. You were like pursuing in some way your curiosity, it seems like. By another way, you will never, if something didn't work out, you were never like, oh, that's it. I should, go back to like, I don't know, working for some grocery store because like my rock career didn't work out, or my first this didn't work out. You were always like pivoting and looking for the next thing, and kind of um, in a sense embracing the opportunities that came your way.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? I've always left myself open to opportunities, and I never let. I've. It's great getting paid. It's great getting a good paycheck, but I never let the idea of how much I'm going to make drive anything. I mean, partly I've been lucky enough to, end up with salaries along the way. So I haven't had to worry, but I was never somebody that would go into the boss's office and say, how about a raise? I was never someone who went into the boss's office and said, I need a different title now. I was always, and maybe this is, because of my father, and I know how hard he worked and all the different things that he did, and he just tried to do the best he could, was I just wanted to be the best at what I did in my own way, on my own terms. And I always wanted to be unique. And that doesn't mean being strange. It just meant, it's like, I want my brain to think. I mean, they talk about think outside the box, right? Yeah. And it's a fine thing, but here's an example of what could be called thinking outside the box that isn't really thinking outside the box. I work in the music business, but I listen to podcasts that, are, marketing and entrepreneur, interviews, but people that do things that are so far away from the music business, but they do things that are different. And then I'll hear something that will inspire me about what they did, and I'll start to figure out, well, how do I apply it to what I do? And when you do that, you start building something bigger than what already exists, because you're limited by your own experience. But if you can adapt from other people's experiences, then your experience enlarges itself.
Yeah, that's what I found. Like a lot of people like that, like creative people, that's like so-called creative people. They're people that other people perceive as creative, like that are able to come up with some like new interesting ideas. It's usually that they are actually able to pull those things that are unrelated and then pull them in this frame, in this dimension of like looking, taking something from some different book, some different industry, completely different topic of life, and then just bring it here and see if how it can be applied here. And then they're able to come up with like just basically new ideas that are kind of revolutionary, it seems like, because the people in that space, they have like blindfolds on and they don't see that side, right?
No, for sure. Well, okay. You brought up Ed Sheeran early on. And I mean, think about it. What Ed Sheeran is doing with the looping pedal he's not the first one to do it. And he's not even necessarily the best one to be doing that kind of work. But what he's done is he's taken this idea of the looping pedal, borrowed it from somebody else, and applied it to what he already knew with regards to song structure and writing songs. And he's built a unique career out of borrowing something from somebody else. It's the same sort of thing. The Beatles took what Little Richard did and then applied it to, the other things that they had heard growing up, like, dance hall music and skiffle music and things like that. They put all that together with their songwriting, and they become what at the time was a unique band called the Beatles.
So also in a way you're saying that being unique or, creativity is not just about, reinventing the wheel. It's also like taking something that's already, been discovered or used, but maybe kind of reframing it or repurposing it for your like specific case.
Absolutely. I mean, you would listen to a record or read a book or see a film differently than I would listen to a record, read the same book, the same record, same book, same film. We both see it two different ways. And then when we tell the story of that film, that book, that record, we tell it two different ways. It's the same thing with creativity. You take everything in from your environment, and then you interpret it out into whatever your creative outlet is to show people. And your life experience is different than mine. And you will have included things into your creative outlet that are different than what mine would be. So people see it two different ways. And it doesn't mean that one is a greater piece of art or isn't a greater creative outlet than the other. One person could look at both of them and like them both. One person could look at both of them and dislike them. One person could look at both of them and like one or the other. It's, it then becomes, you've put something out there, and then the person that's receiving it has their own perception of what it is.
Yeah.
They decide whether or not they like it. And we have a tendency to judge ourselves and the world around us based on the most successful people, because those are the ones that are the most visible. But there are plenty of people in the world that are creative. And I would argue that everybody in the world is creative if they would just use that muscle in their body or their brain. But there's millions, billions of people in the world that are creative, that are making a really good living for themselves that we just don't know about.
Yeah.
But they're perfectly happy in their lives because they're being creative, they're getting it out there in the world, and they're making a living, and they don't have to do anything else other than be creative. The only difference is we don't know who they are because they're not the superstars of the world. They're not Bill Gates. They're not U2 or Lady Gaga,
And what do you think separates usually it's just kind of like luck and plus a lot of variables that are like really hard to predict, or have you seen something in common that usually those people who make it work?
The only thing that they have in common, and it's not the thing that distinguishes one from another, but the only thing that's in common with all of them is the hard work.
Okay.
I would say single-mindedness, but I think it's hard. It's hard work. They have an ability to take all these things in, and I mean, how do you know? And that's fairy dust.
Fairy dust.
They get something sprinkles on them. Some magic dust is sprinkled on them, and that's what takes them to that other level. That place where they become ubiquitous in the world. Everything else, everything else needs to be in place. They need to have done all the hard work. They need to have created something that appeals to a lot of people. But what's the thing that makes them iconic? It's that fairy dust. And the thing that's really interesting about it is we have a tendency to hold all of those people in really high esteem.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you something, because I've had the good fortune of spending a lot of time over 38 years with a lot of people that have had fairy dust on them. They don't know what fairy dust tastes like. They don't know what it feels like. They don't know what it smells like. They don't even know that they have it.
They used to.
It's like somebody has told them that they have it. That's the only way they're regular people like you and I who have done something that we consider extraordinary. And they are just like, that's what they do. On my podcast, the very first episode of the first season, did an interview with a guy named Jim Cuddy, who's one of Canada's biggest songwriters. And I asked him about inspiration. And I said, what inspires you? How do you, and he said to me, there are days that I come into the studio to write songs and I have to go from one instrument to another because nothing's coming out. So I have to work towards inspiration. And it was interesting that became, that was a part of the very first interview that I had posted, it was probably the second interview that I did for the series. But it was interesting that he said that, because I think that's the thing that has been most common with everybody. It's like, it doesn't just happen. You got to put yourself in a place to accept inspiration when it shows itself. You got to work towards inspiration. which means you can't sit on your butt waiting for something to happen. You can't lay in bed expecting genius to rain down on you. You got to be doing stuff. You got to go through a lot of crap before you reach something good. I had a really great experience back in 2014. I was in LA helping arrange a Tom Petty interview, and this was the first time that I had met Tom Petty. And Tom Petty was one of my favorite artists for the entire of his recording career. I was lucky enough to be one of those people that bought the first record very soon after it came out, just because I thought the album cover looked really cool. Because every Saturday we would go to the record stores and we would just buy things on a whim. And I said, we were waiting for the interview to start, and I, told him my story of discovering his music. And I said to him, what's really amazing is you've released all of these really great records, and there isn't one shitty song on any of these records. And he looked at me and he kind of smirked and he went, well, we don't let anybody hear the shitty ones.
Yeah. You think you mentioned that there's one, there's two types of creativity. There's like creativity for the everyday people, and then there's like that, and then there's creativity as a job. And then you said that I think creativity as job is work.
Yeah.
But
it's fun. But it's fun for people. I mean, so for the upcoming season of my podcast, I did an interview with Gordon Lightfoot. And, he's been one of the world's great songwriters, pop songwriters since 1962 or 1963. My very first question to him was, is it still fun for you? And his answer was, yes, it's still fun, but I got to know that the song is working.
Yeah.
For me to continue writing it.
But let's go back a moment before we move with this topic. Just one thing I was really curious about when you were talking about the fairy dust and, kind of becoming, so to speak, ubiquitous and big and famous. I think at the beginning you said, the beginning of your story and your life, you said that you, for a long time, you had the dream, so to speak, to become famous. But it seems like at some point you moved away from it because you said you didn't pursue money. And it also doesn't seem to me as you were pursuing being famous after a while, because like you were working as kind of the person in the background, like client management is more you being kind of the background person. You have a great life and you enjoy what you do, but it's not really a path to becoming famous. So I'm curious, like what made you, if it happened, like what made you change your mind to, from becoming, I want to become famous to, hey, I just love this. I'm getting paid. It's not much. And I just want to pursue this, no matter if I'm going to become famous or not, if I'm going to be rich. I just like this.
It's interesting because I think I'd never, it's interesting the way you asked the question, because I've never thought of this before. I've never been asked that question before. I've never even thought of that before. But now that you've asked the question, the answer came to my mind immediately. I think that the idea of being famous is more about being recognized. Not recognized on the street, but recognized for what you're doing. And I think that whatever feeling I had when I was younger about wanting to be famous was because I felt like I was invisible to the world. And as I got out into the world and I started making connections with people and working with other human beings and being outside of my little tiny circle, I started realizing that I am being recognized. I'm being recognized for the work that I'm doing. I'm being recognized for being pretty good at what I do. And there's a great deal of satisfaction in that. I know that, when I'm on a red carpet with musicians, a lot of the musicians know who I am and all of the media know who I am. It's like, that's recognition. I'm like, I don't need them to take my picture. I don't need to be on camera. As a matter of fact, the times that I am on camera, I look terribly uncomfortable. Like I'm trying to look away and not actually be on camera. To be fortunate enough to be, to have people. Okay. So I told you that one of my favorite bands growing up was Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
And though Bill Aucoin didn't work with Kiss anymore, the members of Kiss would come up to the office to socialize every once in a while, which was really cool for me. The week before I left New York to come back to Toronto, I was walking up Madison Avenue. Our offices were at 53rd and 5th Avenue, and one block over from there is Madison Avenue. So I was walking up Madison to go along 53rd, and it was raining, and I heard from across the street someone yell, "Steve, hey, Steve, Steve." And I look across the street, and there's Ace Frehley waving at me. And I remember my heart exploding, going, Ace Frehley knows who I am. This could be just about the coolest thing in the world. And that, so I think that, I realized that, that kind of satisfaction is all there, that it was all I really needed. I didn't need to be on the cover of People magazine. I didn't need to be on every television show in the world. I just needed to feel like people recognized me and what I was doing, regardless of what it was I was doing.
Wow. And then you found finally, like, through pivoting, because essentially it seems like you pivoted a lot to find this, you finally found like the perfect outlet for this.
Well,
to do creative work and then get kind of recognition for it, and that brought satisfaction, and you just kind of rolled.
Yeah. And it's funny because, you call it pivoting. I never see it. I don't feel like I pivoted at all. I felt like, I just followed what would be my natural path. I continuously use creativity as kind of the path forward. And even though I wasn't the one that was ultimately creating, I did have, whether people used my ideas or not, I always felt like I had creative input. Whether I was in a studio and I was suggesting something to an artist. Here's an example, and this is, and I get a great deal of satisfaction out of stuff, big and small. When I was at Attic Records, the independent label, I told you about this band that we had called Haywire.
Mm-hmm.
And they were recording their second album, and they had a song that was going to be on that album that, from the demos, I had already decided would be the first single from the record. It's a song called Dance Desire. My favorite artist in the 80s was Prince. And I had just gone, the band was in the studio here in Toronto recording their second album. The day before I visited them in the studio, I had gone to see Prince's new movie called Under a Cherry Moon. And the guys in Haywire were also big Prince fans. So I went to the studio to hear what they were doing, and we went across the street to a diner to have some lunch. And I was sitting with a singer, and I was telling him a bit about the movie. And I said, I got this idea for a video for you guys. The movie Under Cherry Moon is all in black and white. And there's a scene in it where Prince and his cohorts are all at this lawn party on this great big mansion. And I said, I've got this idea where you guys, Haywire, are playing on this big lawn party in this mansion. And there's a record that's playing, some song. And you see a butler go over to take the needle off of the record so that you, Haywire, could play. My idea is the video starts that way, and then you yell at the butler to drop the needle, and you see his hand let go. Let me do this. You see his hand let go of the arm of the needle, and it drops back on the record, and then your song starts, and the song starts with this bass bum 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 bum. Anyway, I tell him the story. He goes, "Oh, that's a really cool idea." They go back into the studio. Unbeknownst to me, he put it on the record. That's how the Haywire record starts. The Haywire record starts with him yelling, "Drop the needle." and then it goes into bum 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 bum. And I think we all figured that that would be the video. That's not the video that we made. Anyway, about 18 months later, I was at a dance pool meeting, and there was a hip hop artist in Canada named Maestro Fresh Wes. And he was enjoying a great deal of success in the dance clubs with the song Let Your Backbone Slide. And rap music hadn't happened commercially for the most part, outside of the Beastie Boys and maybe Run DMC and Aerosmith doing Walk This Way. But there hadn't really been any commercial hip hop that really made it into the mainstream. And Let Your Backbone Slide was becoming a really big hit in dance clubs. I happened to be at this dance pool meeting, which is where all of the label reps go and play their latest records for all the DJs. And Maestro Fresh Wes and his manager were there, and they were there to thank all the DJs for playing Let Your Backbone Slide. And then they previewed the next song from his upcoming record. And the next song was a song called Drop the Needle. Mm. And the hook of the song is the sample from the Haywire record. So I then, on the Monday morning, that was on a Saturday. And now on the Monday morning, I went to the president of our label. I told him about this record. And he said, so he then called Maestro Fresh Wes's label to say, we need to get paid for this sample. They didn't want to pay for the sample. We ended up negotiating for Attic Records to put out the Maestro Fresh Wes record in Canada, and it became the first multi-platinum hip-hop record in Canada. I have the satisfaction of knowing that a lot of that has to do with me having that conversation with the singer and saying, I've got this video idea. That kind of stuff, that satisfies. That's all the satisfaction I need. Mm. Is those little things.
It's interesting.
Just those little stories. And it's, whether I, came up with a video idea for somebody, whether I come up with an interesting angle on a marketing plan, whether I, would put together a radio promotion plan. It's like, that's all executing. That's where I would get all of my enjoyment out of, is the execution of the idea.
So what's this is, I think, a great a way to look at this interview through this lens, and it's something you didn't really explain. I would love to hear your take on it. It's what creativity is to you, because you use that word a lot. You use that in a way of but I'm really curious, what's actually creativity? What is it to you? How do you see it in your eyes? How would you say, okay, this is creative work, or this is, being creative?
To distill it down to because I'm thinking about, obviously creativity. I've explained a lot of different ways of being creative.
Yeah.
Through this thing. To me, it's an electric shock in your brain. Full stop. And that electric shock, when you see, see a piece of lightning come out, and maybe sometimes it hits a piece of paper, and that becomes a story, or that becomes a strategy, or that becomes a plan of some sort, or maybe it goes across the room and hits the piano, and that becomes a piece of music, or it hits a canvas and that becomes a painting or a drawing. It's like a spark of electricity in your brain is creativity.
Okay. So it's kind of, I heard it, I think, somewhere. It's I'm making some connection in the brain that hasn't been made before, at least in your own brain, something like that.
In your own brain.
Yeah, in your own.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, whether we can all be creative, whether or not we're all original is another thing altogether.
Okay, yeah, that's a good thing to tell people. So let's pivot now to narrative, because that's definitely something I want to talk about, and I hope we still have time. because I
Okay.
think you have a lot of things to say there. So because for me, narrative storytelling, all that, it's kind of, there's different ways to talk about it, but this is, as you say, it's one of the most powerful tools, whether you are an artist or you would just want to, maybe move people into action. There's many ways, but I think one kind of angle to look at it is that you have this piece on Donald Trump election in 2016. And while I don't want to talk politics, because that's not the point of the podcast, I also strongly believe that his biggest advantage that some people don't recognize is that he has an amazing way to create narratives, to tell stories, and to talk with people. So I'm curious, kind of maybe like your take on maybe the power of narrative, on how you see it, and also how, because you talked about it before a little bit, I'm curious if you ever also dove deeper into like Joseph Campbell and things like that. Like, was it also in your evolution when it comes to the idea of narrative and creating that for artists, or are you looking at purely through the lens of music?
Oh, no. I think that the idea of narrative applies to everybody, and the reason that in that article that I wrote, that the reason I started with the Donald Trump story was because I wanted people to understand right away that this was applicable to everybody. That if you have a story to tell, if you stay true to that story, you're not going to appeal to everybody, but you're going to have a bigger buy-in from those people that you do appeal to. And I think that was sort of the idea. Was the reason not, believe it or not everybody likes the Beatles, just like not everybody likes the Stones, but the people, there are people that love these people to death. And the Donald Trump story I told because I felt it was important for people to understand. And I thought it would be easy to make the distinction between Donald Trump told a story, wrote a narrative that was dark, that was was racist for the most part, and he stuck to it. He didn't try to appeal to everybody. He just wanted to appeal to the people like himself that were angry. Hillary Clinton tried to appeal to everybody and didn't tell a story at all. And so people didn't know where she stood. And I always wonder, it's like people talk about how unlikable she is. I'm like, what's unlikable about her? She's just, she's just a person trying her best to do what she feels is right in the world. She's not unlikable. She's not saying any terrible things, but she's also not saying anything.
And she's unrelatable also, right?
Totally unrelatable to anybody, because she's trying to be liked by everybody. As opposed to Donald Trump, who's like, if I can mobilize my following, then I can count on them to mobilize other people. And it's the same as when we talk to young acts about building their audience. It's like, you have to understand that the deeper the connection you have with your fans, those fans will then go and do the work on your behalf. They will pull in other people. It's the same thing with Stephen King as a writer. He writes a certain kind of book. People love the books that he writes. And they tell people that don't read his books, you got to read his books. They're scary as all hell, but they're so well written, and you got to read his book. They do the work for him. He didn't try to write a whole bunch of different kinds of books. He wrote horror stories. And that's how he made his money, and he made his name on those kind of horror stories. And I believe in that article, I also talk about Barack Obama, and I say that, Donald Trump and Barack Obama are the same, in as much as they each stuck to the one singular narrative It happened that Barack Obama's narrative was, resonated with a lot more people, but he stuck to it. And all of those people that became Barack Obama fanatics helped him do the work to win the White House, much like all of the Donald Trump fanatics helped him do the work to win the White House. I don't know what's going to happen in a week and a half. I'm terrified of what's going to happen in a week and a half. I'd hate to think that he's going to be president for another 4 years. But I'm also a little worried that Joe Biden hasn't actually presented a clear narrative. I think maybe it's a little bit clearer than Hillary Clinton's, in as much as he's, we have the pandemic that we're dealing with, and he does spend a lot of time talking about the climate. So maybe that will be enough. I have my fingers crossed that that'll be enough, because I do know that, the people that follow Donald Trump are going to do whatever they can to keep him in office. They're the fanatics that are going to do the work for him.
But this his power of narrative. But do you also think, because for me personally, I feel like storytelling, narrative, this stuff, it's kind of that not enough people talk about it, and it's kind of, in a sense, in my opinion, a lost art, in a way that we used to be able to do that, but through, I don't know, development, technology, being, having less maybe conversations among people, more like social media, we somehow lost it. So I'm curious, like how, because I think you didn't really touch on this, like how did it develop in you that you figured out, oh, this is so important? Because you started working with artists, and at some point you recognize, hey, like the narrative, the story they tell is like the most fundamental thing, and then we can work on all those other things. So like, how did you figure it out yourself? Was it through some books or?
No, not at all. No, it goes back to that first conversation with Bill Aucoin, and watching the way he worked with Billy Idol, and watching what, when he said that, Billy had a vision, and I'm interpreting vision as narrative. And I saw that, in essence, in the simplest form, Billy Idol saw himself as a punk rock artist that wrote pop rock music. Okay, that's in the simplest form, which means he was never going to lose the aesthetic of being a punk rocker. Mm-hmm. That becomes the core, the string that carries the narrative all the way through. And so I saw that as he wrote the songs had to be consistent with that narrative. I saw that when it came to what the band looked like, it had to be consistent with that narrative. When I watched as they put the tour together and built the stage for the tour, it too was consistent with what that narrative was. And when I saw all that happen, I started, thinking about all the, as a whatever I was in my early 20s at the time. It's like I would start looking around, seeing how the most successful people, whether they are musicians or artists, like, go to Picasso. If you want to use Picasso as an example too, it's like, it's interesting that, I mean, I read Picasso's biography, and he had different stages in his life. He didn't do, like, all that art that he created. He had a blue period. He had a cubist period. It's like it's not like he did, in 1 week, he did a blue painting and a cubist painting and a different abstract thing and then a piece of sculpture. He knew what kind of artist he was going to be, and he would stick to the story. He would stick to doing this series, and then now I'm going to change. And when he changed, he didn't go back. He just kept moving forward. It's the same thing, I think, with anybody that is doing anything. If you're going to have a business, let's call it a shoe repair business, you might do a lot of different things in that shoe repair business, but you want people to know that you're the best at doing something in that shoe repair business. Maybe maybe it's resoling. I'm the best resoler. If you come to me, nobody will resole your shoes better than I do. That's going to be my narrative. I'll be able to polish your shoes. I'll be able to fix the leather. I'll be able to put new laces in the shoes. But I am the best at resoling shoes. And that's sort of the string that carries it through.
So what advice, because that's my follow-up question here, like so one thing is, like, if you can share obviously a little bit, like, what is your process when you start working with like some artists and they don't have a clear narrative, or like how do you go about, kind of pulling it out from them? How do you go about creating it? And then what would be your advice to people? Because I also want people obviously to have as much takeaways as possible from the podcast. Like, what would be your advice, given that it's so important to have a really strong narrative story? Like, what would be your advice through that lens to normal people, in a way, for creating their story? Like, what would be advice, like, be the process, like what they should look at, think about, like, some tips?
with an artist, the conversation usually starts with, what are your goals? What is it that you want to achieve? And then it becomes, then we talk about, what are some of the records, and who are some of the artists that were most influential in your life, and why? And let's start, and then how are those things related to the music that you're making? And how do you see putting those kinds of things together? How do you want to be seen by the world? What are some of the things that are most important to you? One of the things that I try to, say to everybody is, you're going to have an audience of some sort. There are going to be people that pay attention to you. It might just be one person, or, it might be hundreds of thousands of people. What is your purpose? What message do you want these people to have? What good are you going to do in the world with the voice that you have? Think about that, and think about taking on that cause early in your career and early in your life, because that's going to help fulfill you as a person. And quite frankly, it's going to make you more interesting to people. That conversation usually lasts a few hours, and out of that, I think that you sort of need to understand, you need to be able to pick out of that what would appeal to other people. I usually suggest to people, like, have this conversation, try to have this conversation with a stranger and see what they're hearing from what you're saying. Certainly have it with your friends to try and figure it out. I'll tell you a story. We have an artist here in Canada, a young man named Scott Hellman, who's very popular here in Canada. And when I sat down with him, I had the conversation that I just talked about, and he told me a story. This was before we had put out any music of his. And he told me a story when I asked how, really, what was the epiphany for you about having a career in music? And he told me a story about being at a friend's cottage on a rainy Sunday afternoon, and they couldn't go outside. So they sat in the living room of the cottage and smoked cigarettes and went through his friend's father's record collection, and they pulled out Dark Side of the Moon. And they put side one on, and they listened to the record. They didn't speak. And they turned the record over and they put side two on. And when the record was over, Scott realized for the first time that an artist can take you on a journey. And he had heard Dark Side of the Moon before. He knew the record, but he had never really listened to it that way. And when the record was over and he realized that, you could be taken on a journey by music, it's like, that's what I want to do. I want to take people on a journey. And when he told me that story in the midst, that was 2 hours into a conversation. He told me that story. I'm like thinking to myself, that's a story that everybody can relate to. And most importantly, with regards to my position doing publicity, that is a story that is going to turn on a bunch of journalists who would otherwise think of Scott Helman as nothing but yet another kid that wants to be like Shawn Mendes and Justin Bieber. This is, that it was Dark Side of the Moon meant it had, there was some weight to that he understood that an artist could take you on a journey meant that he had depth of character as an artist. And I could begin to help him build a story around that would then create the narrative of Scott as a serious lover of music that was writing pop music that people just hadn't heard yet. And so, when you ask about other people, I mean, it's easy for me to relate this story on a musical sense. It's a little bit more difficult it's the same process, but it's a little bit more, I don't have a practical example that I can give you of something that's outside of music, but it is the same thing. I mean, I guess, the cobbler story that I told, a minute or two ago about being the best,
okay, cool. Sure.
shoe, sole repair person, is kind of an example of it. I think it's just, what is trying to figure out what is the thing about what you're doing that makes you most excited. Because if you can just focus on, why do you, Conrad, do this podcast? You tell people, what is the thing that makes you most excited about doing this podcast? That becomes your narrative. Mm. What's the thing that becomes, why does Elon Musk, design the Tesla? That becomes his narrative, right? It's like, what is the thing that drives your engine? And then tell the whole story. And when you have that story told, don't waver from it. You can bring things in, but never lose sight of what again, I called it the original string, but the string is the narrative or the vision or whatever. Make sure that you stay focused on what it is that that got you excited in the first place.
Mm. So what are there some like resources you would recommend people that you've used to become better at creating narrative, telling stories, like not just books, but maybe some different things that I assume one was experience, but there are other things that you also like.
But that's the thing. It's letting life happen, and don't turn your back on opportunities. Don't turn your back on don't turn your back on opportunities to have conversations with people. Don't turn your back on opportunities to see movies and watch TV shows and listen to radio programs and podcasts and reading books and newspapers. And don't feel like you're doing this stuff as work. Just feel like you're doing this stuff to enrich your life, and then keep your mind open to the possibilities of what the things that you're taking in can contribute to whatever it is you want to ultimately accomplish. Like, to be able to concentrate and have an open mind at the same time,
To be able to concentrate and have an open mind. That's a interesting combination.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I mean, you want to absorb everything around you, but you want to experience it, and you want to be an observer. It's like, so can you I'm trying, we go to Iceland 2 years ago, and we're absorbed in Iceland, and you're looking at it, and you're like in the middle of an ice field, and you're experiencing the ice field, and then you're also having a bit of an out-of-body experience of watching yourself on this ice field. The same way when you're in the middle of reading a book, and somebody, whether it's a real person or a character, says something that inspires you, let yourself be open enough to think of how can I apply this thing that has just inspired me to the thing that I'm doing or the thing that I want to accomplish.
That's a great lesson. It's a great lesson. So one of the last questions I wanted to ask is, and that I'm curious if there even is an answer. Maybe there isn't. Like, how do you? Because I think at some point you started working on your own, right? Like working with artists, but as you're independent, it's yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So how, like, what's your process for, like, how do you choose the clients you work with? Because I assume you have probably artists coming to you different, or maybe you spot them, and then some of you gets your attention and you think, oh, I'm gonna help him because I see a potential in him, or I see something in him that I want to work with him, and some you don't. So, like, what's there?
I mean, first of all, I mean, I started this business back in January. So to start a business, right before a pandemic starts is a little bit challenging. So to this point, it's been artists that have come to me or been recommended to me by people, that are doing different disciplines. It depends. You know what? It depends on what the goals of the artists are ultimately, and whether or not I feel like I can help them achieve their goals. If I don't feel like I can bring anything to the project, then I'll give them whatever, I'll give them a piece of advice or some thoughts. And I wouldn't even say call it advice. I would give them some thoughts and then say, I don't know that I can, you seem to have everything. Either you have everything that you need or you're too far away. And I've yet to say to anybody, you're too far away, because I think that everybody is in a position to want to take the next step. And that's kind of what I see. My ability is to help people take the next step, whatever that might be. But there are people that are just like, they're so far along that, like, I just don't know what I can bring to the table, because you probably need a record company, or I could introduce you to some people and leave it at that. But that's not what I intend to do. My intent is to try and help people through conversations, not that different from what you and I have had for the past hour or so. Help them to understand how they can take the next step in their career, help them understand what expectations are happening on the other side of the table when they're taking meetings with people like managers and record companies and agents, and help them understand that they need to think about what the expectations of fans are. One of the things that I talk about early on when I have my initial conversations with people is I talk about value, and understand as an artist that you have value to the audience, which means you want them to spend money on merch, on concert tickets, on streaming your music or buying your albums. So it's like, you got to show them that you have value to them. And then on the other side of the ledger are your partners, the managers, the publicists, the record companies, and on and on and on. Those people want to feel like they can make money from what you're doing. So what is your value to them in that way? And so if that's how the conversation starts with artists. And if we can that we start to try and figure that out, we start to figure out, it's like, what value do you have right now? How can we increase that value? How can we put you in a position to find more fans? How can we put you in a position to be more attractive to a potential manager? And most importantly, in these terms of where I'm working with artists, if you can find the narrative And this goes back again to the Bill O'Coin thing. If you can figure out what your narrative is, if you can figure out what your goals are and where it is that you want to be, then when you're choosing a manager, you're choosing someone that understands where you want to go. And the conversations you have with them, you're listening for them to tell you the kinds of things that they feel they can do for you to help you get there. And the same thing with an agent and the same thing with a label. Conversely, now going back to this other side with the fans, when you have a clear idea of who you are, like a Lady Gaga, for instance, or a Kiss, or a Rolling Stones, or a U2, the fans know who you are. The fans get a better sense of who you are, even if it is not all truth, even if some of it is, made up stuff. I mean, because, like a lot of Kiss is made up. A lot of Lady Gaga is made up. But people buy into that narrative, and then they become, again, as I said, they become your marketing team. They become your army that goes out and does a lot of the work for you by bringing more people into the fold, because they know the story to tell their friends about who you are as an artist.
Yeah, you have something very powerful, which I think is a problem once you have a lot of people, I think, that have the creative mind, is that I feel like a lot of people who have this, like, in one way or another, they pursue creativity and they do creative work and stuff, but they always forget about the other side of the coin, which is like, at the same time, trying to also do this kind of, like, you could call marketing piece, or like also kind of making sure that your message gets heard, or your voice gets heard, or your music gets heard, right? Like this is, and this is a big thing what you do. And I think a lot of, I guess, artists and people like that struggle with it, because it's on one hand, like, yeah, you want to become the best and stuff, but you also have to put yourself in the position to get heard, right? And that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Full stop. So I think that the last thing we could close out with for today is your podcast. So you've started your podcast. You touched on it a little bit, but I think one thing I haven't heard as far as the podcast goes, like what does this endeavor mean to you at this point of your life? Like what are you kind of trying to achieve with this for both, for both yourself and also for other people?
Well, okay. So The Creationist is a podcast about people who create, simply put. Obviously, I think everybody's kind of got the idea. I have a fascination with creativity and have for my whole life. And I kind of want to tell, if you don't mind, I'd like to tell the story of how my fascination with creativity even began, which is I was watching a television show one day, and it was a documentary on Pablo Picasso. We talked about him a few minutes ago. And the camera was set up, I think it was a program out of Belgium. And the camera was set up behind the easel, and we watched from the easel's point of view of Picasso creating a drawing. And as he puts the first few lines on, you don't know what he's drawing. And then as he makes this picture happen, things start to change as he colors some spots in, and he puts more lines in. And it was the whole idea of the randomness, or the seeming randomness, totally fascinated me as a kid. I mean, I was 8, 9, 10 years old at the time. And it completely fascinated me that this is, that creativity is born out of some sort of randomness. And after that, I would go to art galleries and I would stare at paintings, and I try to figure out what was the first brush stroke, and is this picture that we're looking at right now the artist's intention? And then it becomes like, okay, how does an artist develop a style that is so recognizable, like Van Gogh or Picasso or Matisse? How do they develop that style? And that became a lifelong fascination with creativity. So about 3 years ago, I like you, I have been listening to podcasts forever. I love listening to the people's stories. I love listening to interesting tales, and I just wouldn't get that on the radio. And like so many other people that become podcast listeners, I start thinking, what kind of podcast would I have? And like many other people, I came up with a lot of really terrible ideas for podcasts. And then I was watching CNN one day, and a few years ago, and what's his name? Anderson Cooper was talking about creationists, who are the people that believe that God created the world, and they don't believe in evolution. They believe in, but the word creationist sparked in me this idea. I was like, I could do a podcast about people who create. That would be really great, because it wouldn't just be about musicians. It could be about anything. It could be about people designing cars, and people designing homes, and people doctors developing medicine. It could be all this stuff. And I got really excited about it, but I didn't have the time to do it. And then last year, I left Warner. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do next, but one thing I did know for sure that I wanted to do was start this podcast. And I made a list of the people that some people that I knew. I knew a book author. I knew obviously musicians. I did know a golf course designer. And I also knew how to get in touch with people, because that's what I did for a living as a publicist. I got in touch with people. I knew how to find people. So I just made a list of all the different kinds of creations that I wanted to explore. And I started contacting people. And so, I mean, the first two seasons are really, really diverse. They go from songwriting, golf course design, fashion design, building guitars, making public art. There's designing a house. There's doing album graphics. There's, creating magazines. It's like one thing after another. And it happened that, long story long, I was talking to a guy that wrote a music book, back in June, that I sort of, by strange circumstances, came to meet this guy on, over Facebook and then on phone call. I wanted to do a story on the book that he was writing, because he was writing a book about my 4 most favorite bands from the 70s. And he said, well, the book doesn't come out till December, so can we wait till then? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And after I hung up the phone with him, I started thinking, well, why don't I do like a music themed season? So I then, it's like, okay, so what do I want? Like, I don't want to just talk to musicians. What do I want, what I want to do here? So I made a list of all the people that I wanted to talk to, and all the different things about music that I want to talk to, about creativity. So upcoming at the end of November, early December, I'm going to release the 3rd season, which will be songwriting with Gordon Lightfoot, an interview with creating in the studio with Prince, with a woman named Susan Rogers, who was his engineer from Purple Rain through Sign of the Times. There's a guy named Ira Robbins, who had a very influential rock magazine in the 70s and early 80s out of New York called Trouser Press. My buddy Doug Broad, who wrote this book that I'm talking about, creating an independent record label, creating a music festival. Another fellow that I know, who a guy named Sean Verow, who is in a band called Wide Mouth Mason, who is an extraordinary guitar player that has developed a very unique way of playing slide guitar with 3 slides on his hand rather than just one. So the thing that was really interesting there is creating a brand new guitar style that nobody else on the planet has ever done. It would sort of be like, if I had had the chance to talk to Eddie Van Halen in 1977, that would have been great. And then the final episode for that 3rd season is with a woman named Ebony Rowe, who had 25 years ago established a program in Toronto called Honey Jam, in which it's all female performers in all different areas of music coming together on stage and performing. That's where Nelly Furtado was first discovered, and things like that. So it's pretty exciting. And then, I started, ruminating on ideas for what season 4 will be about.
And what's your like goal as far as like the listeners or viewers? Like, what are you hoping that they take away from the podcast itself and all the seasons?
Yeah, I just hope that it inspires people to be creative, that they can, though pretty much everybody I'm talking to are people that make money out of their creativity. It all starts with a passion. And I just want to inspire people to be passionate. I mean, I'm not, I don't have sponsors on my podcast right now. I don't have advertising on my podcast right now. I have a reasonable number of listeners on, each episode, but it's certainly not in the millions. It's not in the hundreds of thousands. And that's okay for me, because I'm satisfying my soul, because it's something that I really want to do. It's a passion project. And I hope that people are picking up my passion for it, and people are being inspired by some of the stories that are being shared by the people that I'm talking to.
Okay. And you said that the creativity starts from passion, but don't you think it's actually deep down, and that's what I think you have, and throughout all these years you still kind of retained, even though you are 60 now, is curiosity. I think that's...
Oh, absolutely.
I think curiosity is everything.
I think, absolutely. I think that's 100% right. Curiosity is everything. And, like I said to you a few hours ago, I think before we pressed record on this interview, it's like, there's no end to subjects that you can talk about in a conversation, because I think that people who are curious will just keep asking questions and go further and further down rabbit holes.
So what do you think, even though I didn't plan it, it's like, what do you think is that thing that, retaining you, that makes you curious about things and other people don't have? And then they don't ask those questions and they are not curious. Like, can you pinpoint like what's, in your opinion, at least, what it is for you?
No, it's impossible to answer that question, because I'm always curious as to why people aren't curious. It's like, why are you not interested? Why are you not interested in asking questions? I mean, granted, my sister asks way too many questions. No, I'm kidding, Nelly. You don't ask too many questions. No, my sister is incredibly curious, and sometimes I feel like she asks too many questions, but she doesn't. I mean, she asks the questions that are trying to get the answers to the questions that are in her head. And so it's always amazing to me when people don't ask questions. I'm like, are you not curious? Are you not interested? Or I just don't know. I don't. It's hard.
I think personally, I don't know, maybe your take on it, but me personally, I think a lot of it gets killed quite early in life through one, I think, just childhood, when you like, you are the kid, I think innately wants to ask this question, ask them, but at some point, everyone around them gets like mad at them for asking so many questions and then trying to figure things out. And then they just tell them, well, this is just the way it is, accept it. And then I think another one that's big for me, but for me, it worked reversely, that it kind of made me angry. And then I decided to pursue on my own, is school. It's like school, I think it's a big, like a lot of people develop this thing where they don't ask because they don't want to sound stupid. They don't want, maybe be that person who is, like kind of behind, and maybe they didn't get something, or they, they just kind of follow this and they stop. That's at least like from talking to people and looking at things, it seems to me that the place where it kind of gets killed a lot of times is school, because it's not a good place to, I think, ask a lot of questions, because people usually are not. So at least in, I don't know, maybe in States it's different, but
no, I think that you're right for the most part. I think because I as I said to you earlier, it's like, I always considered myself a class clown. So
Me too.
I never, as shy as I say I always was, I always pushed myself beyond my shyness. And I think that that's sort of the difference, is that I never feel like I can't do anything that I'm willing to try.
Mm. It's
You
like
know,
courage.
yeah. I mean, look, I'm afraid of heights. Don't get me wrong. I'm afraid of heights, and I'd rather not walk across anything that's high. But I'm also not afraid to try stuff, and I'll try stuff on a whim. I really, and as long as I don't think I'm going to kill myself, or in my imagination, I don't feel like I can kill myself doing the thing that I'm about to try, then I'll try it. And going back to the conversation that I had with my sister when she said, you're going to talk to strangers, how are you going to do this? It's like, you just do it. What's the worst? What's the worst that can happen? I mean, the worst thing in the world, other than dying, the worst thing, and sometimes even that's not so bad. If if you've lived enough of life. When my dad when my dad was passing away, he was 82 or 83, and and I got to ask him if he was scared, and he's like, scared of what? I've lived a full life, you know. And I think and I thought that was really amazing. But I just think that you just try stuff, and the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to fail. I would say to people all the time, and especially say to my stepsons all the time, it's like, nobody ever learned anything by being right all of the time.
Mm.
So make mistakes and learn from them and move on. Just try stuff, ask questions, fail, succeed, do it all. You only got a couple of lives to live, so live them all.
Yeah, and I hope a person like you can be an example of like, what following your curiosity, not being afraid to fail, what this can bring you. I think you are quite damn happy with your life thus far.
Pretty much, pretty much. So I hope that I hope that people can learn from your podcast. I hope that people can get some inspiration from me and the other people that you're talking to. I hope that you can have a lot of success with this and find an audience of people that, think that what you're doing is really great for them and can be great for others, and share it with other people, and I hope you keep doing it, and that it's like, it doesn't become, this didn't work, let's try something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
And what the hell are you drinking?
Oh,
is this your yerba?
Yeah, this is mate. Yeah. This is the Argentinian tea, or maybe it's not actually Argentinian. It's from Paraguay, but that's where they drink it. South America.
Okay.
Traveled there, just fell in love with it. It's like my one thing. I think that's like constant. I will always love it forever.
Lovely.
Yeah, it's like coffee, but for people who prefer it a slower way.
So coffee for people who prefer tea.
Yeah, but then you can share it. So it's
okay.
It's like this way. I mean, obviously, when you drink it alone, you can't. but normally you can share it. It's like actually how they drink it. It's like you sit in a circle, you pass it around.
That does not sound like it's hygienically safe.
No, it's not. But they've been doing it. Seems like they don't have a problem with it. So
okay.
So yeah, maybe do you have some last thoughts you want to share? Something we didn't talk about. Also, maybe you want to share like where can people find you? That's also a good moment to do so. Yeah. Like.
Well, I would say that I'd love to hear from anybody that's interested in talking to me about anything. That if they want to get in touch with me, and artists in particular, if you're interested from anywhere in the world is fine. I have a website. It's imstevewaxman.com. The letter I, the letter M, imstevewaxman.com, and you'll see a little bit of my backstory. You'll see some of the services that I can provide. And there's a blog there that tells a lot of behind the scenes stories of my musical life that you can enjoy. And also, I please ask everybody, if you got half an hour or 40 minutes, please take a listen to find an episode that you might like of the Creationist podcast. I think that there's something that pretty much anybody can get into. I think there are unusual people that I talk to that you might not think would be interesting, that you might find fascinating, because I think at the end of the day, everybody has a fascinating story to tell. And everybody's story that's fascinating is unexpected.
And then when the host is curious about that, then it makes for a great show episode and great listen.
Thank you. Well, we can all be curious together.
Thanks.
If only my name was George, and we could call it Curious George. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Oh, so thanks a lot, Steve. It was just beautiful to talk to you. I have a lot of takeaways myself. I will have a second listen definitely, just to take more nuggets, write them out. I like take notes.
You're gonna have to drive all the way to Germany in order to listen to this episode. It was great. It was really great talking to you. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you.